Stop! Don't shake her hand! The voice rang out, cutting through the polished ballroom like a thunderclap. The guests froze, their murmurs fading into stunned silence. Richard Caldwell, standing tall at the center of the room, glanced down at the hand of Maya Thompson, the young black woman who had offered it to him with a hopeful smile. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, the weight of expectation hanging thick in the air. He didn't move. The room, once filled with laughter and chatter, now buzzed with an uncomfortable tension, as if time itself had paused. The moment stretched on, the silence deafening. Richard, a man who had built an empire from nothing, a self-made billionaire, had no time for such trivial gestures. His gaze remained cold, unreadable, as he took a step back. Maya's hand remained outstretched, trembling slightly from the sting of rejection. Her eyes, however, didn't waver. She didn't lower her gaze or retreat. She stood her ground, her dignity intact, as she slowly withdrew her hand and tucked it into her coat pocket. "I didn't think you'd want to shake the hand of someone like me," she said quietly, but the words carried. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't anger. It was just the raw, undeniable truth. Richard's chest tightened, but he said nothing. The crowd seemed to exhale in unison, the hum of whispers growing louder. Maya turned and walked away, her black heels clicking against the marble floor, each step a declaration of quiet strength. Richard watched her go, an unfamiliar discomfort settling in his gut. He was used to power, to control. But something about this woman's simple rejection of his disdain made him uneasy. He had seen her around before, a server at the gala, always poised, always professional, never one to make waves. Yet today, she had dared to challenge him in the most unexpected way. His hand hovered in the air for a moment longer, then fell to his side. He couldn't explain why he had rejected her, why he had refused the hand of someone who had never done him wrong. Was it pride? Arrogance? Or something deeper, something unspoken? Richard shook the thought away. He had more important matters to focus on. But as the evening wore on, the image of Maya, her unflinching gaze, her unwavering confidence, kept circling his mind. It wasn't supposed to matter. She was just another woman, another face in the crowd. But the longer he thought about it, the more he realized it did matter. The next morning, as Richard stood in his office overlooking the city, a strange feeling lingered. The world outside was bustling, everyone rushing to their next destination, but he was still lost in the moment from last night. The sound of her voice, calm and composed, echoed in his ears. "I didn't think you'd want to shake the hand of someone like me." The words gnawed at him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a mistake. A mistake so subtle, so seemingly insignificant, yet powerful enough to unsettle him. He dealt with billion-dollar deals, negotiations, and corporate wars. He had faced challenges, but this simple act of rejecting someone, felt different. Why did it matter so much? Why did her words still sting? He sat back in his chair, staring at the skyline. A part of him knew he had to make things right. But what was the right thing to do? What did he even owe her? The morning stretched on, but Richard couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the ballroom, to Maya. He needed to find her. He had to fix this. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped into the luxurious hotel lobby. The place was buzzing with energy, people laughing, chatting, the sound of clinking glasses, and the smooth hum of background music. Yet, in the midst of it all, my mind was elsewhere. The memory of last night, of Maya's face, kept replaying in my head like an echo. I had been cold, dismissive, and for what? What did it even matter? I was used to being in control. I had built my life around that control, but something about Maya's strength, her poise, and her rejection of my indifference had unsettled me in a way I couldn't ignore. I pushed open the heavy glass door of my office, my shoes clicking against the polished floor as I walked inside. The space was familiar, modern, sleek, everything I had come to expect from my own success. But even here, in the place that should feel like home, I felt off. I sat down at my desk, the cool leather of the chair pressing against my back. The view outside was stunning, Manhattan stretched out before me, endless and alive, but it did nothing to calm the storm that was brewing inside me. I needed answers. I needed to know why this one woman, this one small interaction, had shaken me so deeply. I pulled up the events from last night in my mind. The party. The crowd. The moment she had offered her hand, only to be rejected. I hadn't even thought twice about it at the time. But now, as I sat in the stillness of my office, it all felt so wrong. I had never questioned myself like this before. I had never been made to feel so small. I wanted to call her, to apologize, but I couldn't. What would I say? How could I even explain my actions? I could already hear her voice in my head, calm and unwavering, saying, "I didn't think you'd want to shake the hand of someone like me." Her words had stung more than I cared to admit. There was no arrogance in her tone, no anger. Just the blunt, painful truth. The realization hit me hard. I had judged her. I had assumed she was just another woman, another face in the crowd. But I was wrong. I stood up from my desk, pacing the room as I tried to gather my thoughts. I had to make things right. But how? I grabbed my phone, staring at the screen for a long moment before deciding. I needed to find her. I needed to apologize, to acknowledge the hurt I had caused. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like it took forever. As the doors opened, I stepped out and scanned the crowd. There she was. Maya. She stood across the room, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't see me, but I saw her, how she moved, how she carried herself with such dignity. It was clear that, despite everything, she didn't need my validation. She was enough on her own. But I had to do this. I had to speak to her, to try and make amends for the way I treated her. My footsteps echoed as I approached her, and for the first time in years, I wasn't sure what to say. She turned as I neared, her eyes meeting mine. There was no sign of surprise, no anger. Just that same calm resolve. She wasn't going to make this easy for me, and I didn't expect her to. "Maya," I began, my voice rougher than I intended. She didn't respond right away, just waited, her eyes steady. I owe you an apology. Last night, I was out of line. I was rude, and I shouldn't have treated you that way." For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence between us stretched long, and I wondered if she would even accept my apology. But then, slowly, she nodded. "It's not about the apology," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's about how you see people, how you treat them." Her words struck me harder than anything I had expected. I had spent so long focusing on my empire, on my business, that I had forgotten what it meant to truly see someone. Not for their status, not for what they could do for me, but simply for who they were. She was right. I had treated her as less than, and in doing so, I had ignored the most important part of her, her humanity. I swallowed, my throat tight. "I want to make it right," I said, barely above a whisper. "Let me show you that I can do better." She regarded me for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "I'll believe it when I see it," she said. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, humbled, but determined to prove her wrong. The next day, I found myself standing outside Maya's apartment building, the morning sun casting a soft, golden light over the city. I had told myself I would give her space, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something more. I had apologized, yes, but words alone didn't feel like enough. I needed to show her that I wasn't the same man I was the night before. I needed to prove to her that my change wasn't just a fleeting moment of guilt, but a real shift in how I viewed the world. I hesitated before pressing the doorbell, unsure of what kind of reception I'd get. Would she even want to see me again? After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure. If I could just waltz back into her life, even if it was only to make amends. The door opened, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. For a moment neither of us spoke. I could feel the weight of the tension between us, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. But then she stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. "You wanted to talk," she said, her voice calm yet firm. I nodded, walking in slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Maya led me to the small, modest living room. It wasn't much, but it felt warm and real, nothing like the cold, sterile luxury of my world. I sat down on the couch, my hands clasped together in my lap, trying to find the right words. "I know I've hurt you," I began, my voice steady but filled with regret. "I know I've judged you. And I can't take that back. But I want you to know that I'm trying to change. I'm trying to be better." Maya didn't say anything at first. She simply sat down across from me, her gaze steady, piercing. I could tell she was processing my words, weighing them carefully. "You think just saying sorry is enough?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Do you think that makes up for everything you've done?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course, I knew the answer. No, saying sorry wasn't enough. But I had to start somewhere. "No," I replied quietly, shaking my head. "I know it's not enough. But it's the only place I can start. I've spent so much time building my empire, my reputation, that I lost sight of what really matters. And I don't want to lose that again." She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to believe me, I could tell. But could she? Could she really trust that I was genuine? I didn't blame her if she couldn't. "Why did you reject me?" she asked softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "Why did you treat me like that? I don't care who you are, but I care about how you treat people." Her words cut through me like a knife. I had no defense, no excuse. I had treated her as if she were beneath me, and that was unforgivable. "I was wrong," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I was arrogant, and I judged you based on things that didn't matter. And I'm sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." There was a long silence between us, and I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, as if she were trying to decide whether or not to believe my words. Finally, she spoke again. "I'm not here to fix you," she said. "I'm here because you need to fix yourself. And if you really want to change, you'll show me, not with words, but with actions." I nodded, understanding what she meant. This wasn't about proving myself to her. It was about proving to myself that I could be a better person, that I could see people for who they truly were, not just as means to an end. "I will," I said, my voice firm. "I promise." Maya stood up then, walking over to the small kitchen area. She turned around, giving me one last, assessing look. "I hope you do," she said softly. "Because actions speak louder than words." As I left her apartment later that day, I couldn't help but feel a sense of determination settle in my chest. I had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. I had no idea where it would lead, but I knew I had to start somewhere. And that somewhere was with me. I couldn't change the past, but I could control how I moved forward. And moving forward meant showing Maya, and myself, that I was capable of change. I couldn't stop thinking about Maya, about how she stood in front of me with that unflinching gaze, making me question everything I had built my life on. The apology, though necessary, had been just the beginning. I had promised myself I would show her I could change, but proving that wouldn't be easy. I wasn't sure if she believed me, but I knew I had to start somewhere. The next few days were a blur. I kept myself busy with work, trying to bury the thoughts of her, but they kept resurfacing. I couldn't escape the memory of her calm but firm voice, telling me that actions speak louder than words. She had been right, of course. All I had done so far were empty apologies. I had to do more. I needed to prove to her, and to myself, that I could be someone different. It wasn't until a week later that I saw her again. I had heard she was working at a new job, a small cafe in the city. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and I knew it would be a place I could find her. I walked into the cafe that afternoon, the small bell above the door ringing as I entered. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. Maya was behind the counter, her back to me as she arranged a tray of pastries. Her movements were graceful, almost like she was in her own world, and for a moment, I just watched her. I knew this wasn't the right time to approach her, but I couldn't stop myself. I walked up to the counter, and when she turned to greet me, her face was unreadable. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice professional, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. I paused for a moment, unsure of how to begin. "I'd like a coffee," I said finally, keeping my voice steady. "But more than that, I wanted to talk." Maya's expression didn't change, but I could tell she was weighing my words. She didn't say anything right away, just motioned for me to sit at one of the small tables by the window. I took a seat, and after a moment she followed, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. The silence between us felt heavy, but this time, it was different. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just the space we needed to find the right words. "I know this isn't easy for either of us," I said, breaking the silence. "But I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About how I treated you." Maya didn't look at me right away, instead focusing on the cup of coffee in front of her. I could see the small movements of her hands, the way her fingers played with the edge of her cup. She wasn't angry, but she was still guarded. "You're right," I continued. "I've spent so much of my life focusing on building a legacy, on making money, on controlling everything around me, that I've lost sight of what really matters." She finally looked up at me, her eyes soft but still distant. "What really matters?" she asked, her voice low. I could hear the skepticism in her words, and I understood it. I had given her nothing but words for so long. It was time to show her the truth. "People," I said quietly. "It's people who matter. Not the money, not the power, but how we treat each other. I can't change everything I've done, but I can try to be better." Maya studied me for a long time, and I could see the walls she had built around herself start to crack, just a little. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice still cautious. "Prove it," I said. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I'm capable of change. I want to help you, not because I feel guilty, but because it's the right thing to do." She didn't speak right away, and for a moment I feared I had said too much, too soon. But then she gave me a small nod. "I'll hold you to that," she said, the corners of her lips turning up ever so slightly. "I'll believe it when I see it." It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. It was more than I had expected, and in that moment I realized that this was what I had been missing all along, the ability to change, to grow, and to be held accountable. "I'll show you," I said, my voice firm with resolve. "Starting now." Maya didn't respond, but the look in her eyes told me that, for the first time, she saw something in me worth believing in. I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment I knew one thing for sure: I was ready to prove myself. I was ready to do the work, and I wasn't going to stop until I showed her, and everyone else, that I was capable of being more than just a man of power and wealth. I could be a man of integrity. I could be someone who saw people, really saw them, for who they were. And I was willing to spend the rest of my life earning that respect. I walked into the cafe the next morning, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been thinking about Maya constantly, her words echoing in my mind, pushing me forward. It had been a week since I had promised to prove myself to her, and I knew today was the day I had to take the next step. I had been back to my office, handling my usual business, but there was something in the back of my mind that kept reminding me of Maya. Her strength, her dignity, everything I had underestimated about her. It was time to show her that I could do better, that I could be better. Maya was behind the counter again, just like the last time, but this time, I wasn't just there for coffee. I was there to take action, to do something that spoke louder than words. She looked up when I entered, her eyes briefly meeting mine before she went back to her task. I could tell she was busy, but there was a noticeable pause, a slight hesitation in her movements, as if she knew I was there for something more. "I'll have a black coffee," I said, walking up to the counter. She nodded and reached for the coffee pot, not meeting my eyes. For a moment, the tension was palpable. I could feel the weight of what I had promised, the weight of proving myself. Maya, I said, my voice quieter than I intended, but steady. She paused mid-pour and finally looked up at me. I need you to know something, I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't respond, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes, the flicker of something, perhaps hope, perhaps skepticism. I meant what I said, I went on, taking a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I treated you. And I can't change what happened. But I want to show you, with actions, that I'm not the same man I was before. That I can do better, that I can be the man I promised I would be. Maya didn't speak right away, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was processing my words, trying to decide whether they were just another empty promise. I couldn't blame her. I had broken promises before. But this time, I was determined to prove that. I wasn't just talking. You said you'd show me, she said after a moment, her voice steady but guarded. I'm waiting to see it. I nodded, a feeling of determination settling in my chest. You will, I promised. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I want to help, I said, my voice firm. I know you don't need my help, but I want to help. I want to make things right, starting with you. There was a long pause as Maya studied me. For a second, I thought she might refuse, might walk away and tell me it was too late. But instead she sighed, her eyes softening ever so slightly. You're right, she said quietly. I don't need your help. But maybe you need to help yourself. Maybe you need to prove that you can be someone who doesn't just take, but gives. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words sink in. She was right again. This wasn't about me fixing her. It was about me fixing myself, about doing the work to change and become a better person, not just for her, but for the people around me. I will, I said, my voice steady now. I'll prove it, one step at a time. Maya didn't respond, but there was a shift in the air between us. It wasn't a dramatic change, but I could feel it. It was like a door opening, just a crack, and I knew it was up to me to step through it. Over the next few days, I kept my word. I started small, doing things that I knew would show Maya, and everyone else, that I was serious. I called the community center and arranged for a donation, one that would go toward helping those who had been overlooked, just like Maya had been. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I didn't want recognition. I wanted to make a difference. I started offering help at the local shelters, working with organizations that focused on giving back to the community, something I had ignored for so long in my pursuit of success. I knew it wasn't enough, but it was a start. And every time I saw Maya, I could tell she was noticing, even if she didn't say anything. She watched me closely, and I didn't expect her to believe me right away. But as the days went on, I could see the way she softened, the way she started to trust me again, just a little. It was a slow process, but it was real. One afternoon, a week after our conversation at the cafe, I found myself standing outside the small community center, waiting for Maya. She had agreed to meet me there after her shift, and I was nervous. Not because I thought she would reject me, but because I knew that I still had so much to prove. When she arrived, she looked at me, her face unreadable. But then she smiled, just a little. You're really doing it, she said quietly. You're really trying. I nodded, feeling a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. It's not easy, I admitted. But I want to prove that I'm capable of change. I want to prove that I can be someone worth believing in. Maya looked at me for a long time, and then, for the first time, she stepped closer. I believe you, she said softly. But don't stop. Keep proving it. And just like that, I knew I had taken another step forward, not just for her, but for myself. I stood in the cold early morning, the city around me alive with energy, but I felt different. I had been making progress, and I could see it in Maya's eyes every time we crossed paths. But today, I had a new goal, something more personal. I had been working on myself, trying to show her that I could be better, but it was time to take a bigger step. I had spent weeks volunteering at community centers, donating to causes, and helping people, but there was something else I had to do. It was time to face my past. I had spent too long hiding behind my wealth, behind my business, using it as a shield to avoid the hard truths about myself. I needed to confront the parts of me that had allowed me to treat people like they were beneath me, like they existed only for my benefit. I had to make peace with that version of myself, and show Maya that I was capable of true change. I walked to the office, my footsteps echoing against the pavement. The usual distractions were gone, the noise of the city faded into the background, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. I had avoided confronting my own failures for too long. But today, that changed. I walked into my office, sat down at my desk, and called the one person who could help me see through the fog of my own arrogance, my old mentor, James. He had been the one who taught me everything I knew about business, about making decisions, and about using my power. But he had also been the one who warned me about losing sight of what truly mattered. "James," I said, my voice steady, "I need your help. I've been doing everything I can to make things right, but I feel like there's something I'm missing. Something deeper. I need to confront the way I've been living, and I don't know where to start." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the familiar sound of James' deep, steady voice. "You've been running away from the truth for years, Richard. You've been hiding behind your money, your empire. But the truth is, you can't change what you've done without facing it first." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. He was right. I had spent my life building a fortress around myself, convincing myself that everything I did was justified by my success. But now, I understood. I couldn't hide anymore. "I know," I said quietly. "I'm ready." The conversation with James was the first real step I had taken toward facing my past. He guided me through the process of confronting the mistakes I had made, not just in my business, but in my personal life, with the people I had hurt along the way. As I spent more time reflecting on the choices I had made, I realized how much I had taken for granted. I had used people for my own gain, ignored their needs, and dismissed their worth. And Maya had been the one who had opened my eyes to that. I hadn't understood it at the time, but now I did. She had been right all along. She wasn't just a lesson in humility for me. She was a mirror. She was showing me the parts of myself I had refused to see. And I couldn't be angry at her for it. I had been angry at myself for so long. It was time to stop running from that. It was time to stop running from the truth. A few days later, I found myself walking to the small cafe where Maya worked. The familiar sound of the bell ringing above the door greeted me as I entered. The place was quieter than usual, and Maya was behind the counter again, her movements calm, composed. When she saw me, her expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift in her eyes. She was waiting to see if this was just another fleeting promise, or if I was really ready to make a change. "Maya," I said, my voice steady but filled with the weight of what I had learned. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she was listening. "I want to apologize again. But this time, I want you to know that I'm not just saying the words. I've been working on myself. I've been facing the things I've ignored for years, the mistakes I've made, and the people I've hurt. And I realize now, more than ever, that I can't undo what I've done. But I can be better. I can be someone who treats people the way they deserve to be treated. I can be someone who sees them for who they truly are." Maya looked at me for a long time, her gaze steady, unwavering. For a moment, I wondered if she was considering whether or not to believe me. But then, without a word, she nodded. It wasn't a big gesture, but it was enough. I could see the walls she had built around herself start to loosen, just a little. "I believe you," she said quietly. "But don't stop. Keep proving it. I'll be watching." The weight of her words settled over me, and I knew, in that moment, that this was only the beginning. I had a long way to go. But I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding from the truth. I was facing it head on. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had the power to change, not because of my money, but because of the work I was doing on myself. I had a chance to be someone better, someone worth believing in. And I wasn't going to waste it. I sat in my office. Late that evening, the city lights outside twinkling like distant stars. The day had been long, filled with meetings and decisions that seemed to weigh heavier than usual. But the thoughts in my mind weren't about business. They were about Maya, about everything I had promised her, and everything I still had left to prove. I had spent the last few weeks showing her that I was serious about change, but there was something I hadn't done yet. Something I knew I needed to do if I was going to fully honor my commitment to her. I had to confront the people in my life who had helped shape the man I had become. I had to talk to my family. They were the ones who had taught me the value of wealth, the power that came with it. They were the ones who had always reminded me that success was about domination, control, and never showing weakness. But now I knew I couldn't live in their world anymore. I couldn't be the man they wanted me to be. I had to take responsibility for my actions, for how I had let my arrogance and privilege define me. The next morning, I made the decision to visit my parents. I hadn't seen them in months, not since the last family gathering where the conversation had turned to business, and I had felt myself slip back into the old patterns. But today, it was different. Today, I was going to speak up. I arrived at their house in the early afternoon. The place was just as grand as I remembered, the manicured lawns stretching out in front, the columns that seemed to rise into the sky. It was a symbol of everything I had once strived for, the power, the money, the status. But as I stepped inside, it all felt hollow. My mother was in the living room, sitting by the window with a cup of tea. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. "Richard," she said with a nod. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I said, walking toward her. "I've been busy." She raised an eyebrow but didn't comment further. "I need to talk to you," I continued, my voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about the way I've lived my life, about the choices I've made." She set her tea down and looked at me, the air between us suddenly tense. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice calm but wary. "I've been living in a world that doesn't value people," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I had intended. "I've been using my wealth to control everything, to define people by what they can give me. And I've hurt people because of it." My mother didn't say anything at first, her gaze fixed on me. I could see the disappointment in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Maybe it was the faintest trace of recognition. "You're not making sense," she said after a moment, her voice softer now. "This is who we are. You've built an empire. Why are you suddenly questioning it?" "Because I've realized that building an empire doesn't mean anything if it's built on the backs of people you've disregarded," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been blind to the way I've treated people, the way I've treated you, and I can't do it anymore." She didn't speak for a long while, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of her teacup. Then she finally looked at me, her eyes sharp, assessing. "You've always been driven, Richard," she said. "And that's a good thing. But what you're saying now doesn't make sense. You're throwing away everything you've worked for." "I'm not throwing it away," I said. "I'm changing the way I think about it. I'm not going to let my wealth define who I am anymore. I want to be someone who values people for who they are, not for what they can give me." My mother didn't answer right away, but her silence wasn't anger. It was contemplation. After a long pause, she stood up and walked over to the window. "I don't know if I can understand this, Richard," she said quietly. "But I do know one thing. You've always been my son. And whatever path you choose, I'll support you." It wasn't the answer I had expected, but it was the one I needed. It wasn't about agreeing with me. It was about accepting my decision. As I left my parents' house later that day, I felt a sense of relief. It wasn't easy to confront the people who had shaped me, but it was a necessary step. I had started to make peace with my past, and now it was time to focus on the future. I called Maya that evening, my hand shaking slightly as I dialed her number. When she answered, her voice was soft, but I could hear the curiosity in her tone. "Maya," I said, my voice steady but vulnerable. I talked to my parents today. I told them everything. About how I've been living, about the mistakes I've made. And I wanted you to know, I'm committed to this change. To being better, to treating people with respect. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then she spoke. I believe you, she said, her voice gentle. But remember, actions speak louder than words. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. I know, I said. And I'm ready to prove it. I had been working on myself for weeks, each day feeling like a small step forward. But despite everything, there was always a lingering question in the back of my mind. Was I really changing? Or was I simply going through the motions, hoping that Maya and everyone else would believe I had become someone different? I had promised her that I would prove myself through actions, and I knew it was time to show her that I meant it. The first opportunity came sooner than I expected. I received a call from one of the community leaders I had been working with. They were organizing a charity event, a fundraiser aimed at providing education for underprivileged children, and they needed my help. At first, I had almost dismissed it. I had been used to focusing on my own empire, my own interests. But then I remembered what Maya had said. It's about proving yourself, not just talking about it. I knew this was my chance to put my words into action. I agreed to help, but not in the way I had initially imagined. I wasn't just going to throw money at the problem. I was going to be there, on the ground, doing the work alongside everyone else. It wasn't enough to just write a check. I needed to show that I cared about these people, about their struggles, and about making a real difference in their lives. The event was held at a small, community-run center on the edge of town. The building was modest, the kind of place I would have once ignored. But as I walked through the doors, I was struck by the energy in the room. People were working together, setting up booths, organizing materials, and making sure everything was ready for the fundraiser. Maya was there, too. She was standing at the registration desk, her face lighting up when she saw me. You actually showed up, she said, a note of surprise in her voice. I told you I would, I replied, my voice steady but filled with a quiet pride. I had made it. I had come here, not just to throw money at a cause, but to be part of something bigger than myself. Maya didn't say anything else, but the way she looked at me told me everything I needed to know. She was watching me, waiting to see if I was serious about this. I could feel her eyes on me as I moved through the event, talking to the people there, offering help where it was needed. I spoke with parents whose children were attending the local school, with volunteers who were working tirelessly to make the event a success. I wasn't just a bystander. I was participating, fully engaged, and it felt good. It felt like I was doing something that truly mattered. As the event came to a close that evening, the room was filled with laughter, music, and the sound of people coming together for a common cause. I had never felt so connected to something in my life. I glanced over at Maya, who was standing by the door, watching the crowd. She caught my eye and gave me a small, approving nod. It wasn't much, but it was everything. I had done it. I had shown her, and myself, that I was capable of real change. But there was still more to do. I wasn't done proving myself. This was just the beginning. The next few weeks were filled with more moments of change. I continued working with the community, helping where I could, and making sure my actions matched my words. But even more than that, I started to understand the importance of what I was doing. It wasn't just about making up for past mistakes. It was about being the kind of person who didn't need to be asked to help, the kind of person who cared about the well-being of others, even when there was nothing to gain. Maya and I spoke more often now. It wasn't just about the charity work or the things I was doing to make up for the past. It was about real conversations. She was beginning to open up to me, and I was starting to understand the world from her perspective. There were still moments of doubt, still moments when I wondered if I was truly capable of change. But every time I saw Maya, I knew I was on the right path. I had made mistakes, and I would make more in the future. But now, I was committed to doing better. I was committed to being someone who saw people, not just their value in terms of what they could do for me, but as human beings, worthy of respect and compassion. And as I looked at Maya, standing beside me at another event, her eyes meeting mine with that familiar, knowing gaze, I knew I had earned something far more valuable than her approval. I had earned my own sense of worth, and for the first time, I felt at peace with who I was becoming. I had come a long way since that first conversation with Maya. Every day, I had made an effort to prove myself, to show her and the world that I wasn't the man I had once been. But even now, with all the progress I had made, there were moments of doubt. It wasn't easy to change, especially when you've spent your whole life building a foundation on things that were now irrelevant. I had built my success on wealth and power, but the more time I spent with Maya, the more I realized how empty that foundation had been. Today was different. Today was a day I had been waiting for, a day that would change everything. The charity event we had been working on for weeks was finally here, and it was going to be the culmination of everything I had done to prove myself. I had put my heart and soul into this cause, and I knew that it was more than just a fundraiser. It was a chance to show the people who had supported me that I was truly capable of making a difference. I arrived at the venue early, before the crowd started to gather. The lights were being set up, the tables were being arranged, and the volunteers were buzzing with excitement. It was the kind of event I used to attend in the past, but this time, I wasn't just a guest. I was part of something bigger. I walked through the hall, greeting people, shaking hands, and offering my help where I could. But as the evening wore on, I felt a sense of pride building inside me. Not because of the success of the event, but because I had become part of a community. I had shown up, not as a wealthy businessman, but as someone who cared about the cause, about the people who needed help. As the night went on, I kept my eye on Maya. She was working just as hard as everyone else, making sure everything was running smoothly. She was still the same strong, determined woman I had met weeks ago, but now, there was something different in her eyes when she looked at me. It wasn't skepticism anymore. It was trust. I knew I had earned it. At the end of the night, after the last guest had left, and the final donation had been counted, Maya came over to me. She stood in front of me, looking at me with that steady gaze that had once made me feel so uncomfortable. But now, it didn't make me uneasy. It made me feel proud. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with meaning. "You really did it." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I couldn't have done it without you," I replied. "You were the one who pushed me to be better, to see things differently. I owe you more than you know." She shook her head slightly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "You did this for yourself. And that's what matters." Her words stayed with me as the evening came to a close. I had come a long way from the man I used to be, but I knew the real work had just begun. I wasn't perfect, and I would never be perfect, but I had made a choice to be better. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was on the right path. As I walked out of the venue that night, Maya by my side, I knew that I had done something meaningful. Not just for the people at the event, not just for the community we had helped, but for myself. I had proven to myself that I could change, that I could be someone worthy of respect. I wasn't defined by my wealth or my past mistakes anymore. I was defined by the choices I made moving forward. And as I looked at Maya, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. I had found something far more valuable than money or power. I had found my purpose.